The sanctuary city debate heats up, and Democrats host their own Tea Party. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Joe Ingles, State House reporter for Ohio Public Radio, Jim Siegel, State House reporter for the Columbus Dispatch, Gene Krebs, former state legislator, and Sandy Tice of Progress, Ohio. As Ohio's cities like Columbus and Cincinnati take steps towards becoming sanctuary cities, conservative lawmakers want to make it a crime. Newly elected State Rep Candace Keller of Middletown put forward a proposal that would ban cities from refusing to work with immigration officials, and it would hold city officials criminally liable if an undocumented immigrant commits a crime. State Treasurer and U.S. Senate candidate and vocal Donald Trump supporter Josh Mandel supports that bill. Gene Krebs, how can you hold a mayor or a city council member criminally liable if somebody else commits a crime?
Representative Keller is actually one of the people who's replaced me in my old seat. And so I'm from that. She's not too far away from me. I wish she had called me before she had dropped the bill in. And here's the reason why: was something nobody's talking about, is that if a elected official in the city level does not follow certain laws and rules, they can remove their sovereign immunity protection. And in which case then they become personally liable for any acts they may take that are of a certain egregious nature. So what the bills that they've called for may be redundant and may not be necessary, because if and the other thing is, when you talk,
doesn't the liability have to directly relate to the crime or the offense?
And so
you can't. I mean, undocumented worker doesn't automatically mean criminal.
Right, and the other thing that you have to keep in mind of all this is that you look around the cities. Very few cities in Ohio are referring to themselves as being definite sanctuary cities. They're just simply saying our cops have other things to do, and they simply aren't going to pay that much attention to this issue.
So what is this?
It's political grandstanding on the part of Josh Mandel when he ran for his last race against Sherrod Brown, and when he ran for the state treasurer's office the first time. He ran a pretty race-based, anti-Muslim, anti-African American campaign, and he apologized for it, and now he's doing it again.
But isn't it grandstanding on these cities' part to say we're not going to cooperate with immigration officials when really they haven't been overly cooperative anyway?
Well, this also affects all kind of faith leaders too. A lot of the churches take in people and provide sanctuary to them, and so you're getting some pushback from the religious left and the religious right. It's mean. There's no need for this. There's not one incident that they can show us where somebody has come in and committed this type of crime in Ohio.
But in California, they absolutely have, and in today's national media climate. So actually, I think it was a 4-time offender, and committed and killed a woman on the Golden Gate Bridge, if I remember correctly. So yeah, there has been cases of it.
There are isolated cases in all things. And Joe, you reported on this story this week, and you looked at other studies that show that it's no different between that population and the regular population.
Right, and in some cases, there are some studies out there that show sanctuary cities are actually safer than a city that's not designated as a sanctuary city. But what this comes down to is, there are a lot of political points to be scored right now if you are a Republican and you are trying to go after the base of Donald Trump. And, a lot of the Republicans are saying, hey, Donald Trump was voted in for a reason, and one big reason was his stance on immigration, so we're going to go there and we're going to stand in that corner.
Jim Siegel, those points, they're good perhaps right now. Will they last? Like for Josh Mandel, for instance.
Well, I think it's hard for anyone to try to be Donald Trump, which I believe Josh Mandel is trying to do right now, and definitely trying to reach out to the Trump supporters who backed him for things like immigration. I mean, from my vantage point, Columbus has a fairly good-sized Somali population, so there is definitely a reason why Columbus officials, Mayor Ginther, has addressed this. I mean, let's face it, Columbus, because of an executive order he signed, they've basically been called a de facto sanctuary city. But as I look at this, I'm like, is this really what we need to focus on? I mean, there's a lot of people being murdered every year in the city of Columbus and in cities across the state. not being murdered by immigrants necessarily, or refugees, or any of these other groups that we've suddenly demonized a lot more than we had in the past. There are other crime issues that these cities have to deal with, and I'm not going to defend whether or not they should be, upholding the law on immigration, but this seems to be an out of whack focus on this when there seems to be so many other problems.
Gene, why is Josh Mandel aligning himself so closely with Donald Trump? He may face a primary opponent, but he would have the name recognition and the money advantage probably if, say, Pat Tiberi ran against him. So why is he so closely, so early on, aligning himself with Donald Trump?
Because in a state that is normally evenly divided within 2.2 percentage points off the national norm, Trump took Ohio by a very significant margin last time. I believe it was 5.5%. If Kasich had not been on the ballot in the primary, then considering how that race fell out, Trump easily would have taken Ohio in the primary, because Kasich would be the favorite son candidate, so to speak. So he understands how the state is currently structured politically with the Republicans, and is taking his stand.
But Sherrod Brown is not Hillary Clinton. He's not going to forget the campaign in Northeast Ohio. He's from there. He's very much anti-trade, has been for a long time. Not all Trump supporters are going to vote for him, but he's going to do better than Hillary Clinton. No, Sandy?
Absolutely. I think Sherrod's strength is that he represents the whole state, and he represents it very well. And Josh thinks if he's going to have a Republican primary, he has to be the most conservative, because that's who win primaries. All he's doing is doing a disservice. Every major newspaper in Ohio endorsed Sherrod last time because of the tenor of Mandel's campaign.
But every newspaper endorsed Hillary Clinton too, and how'd that work out?
Well, but Trump only won with 26% of the eligible votes. I think a lot of people will be participating.
But I also think you have to look at the fact that we're in an era of major realignment, and I know that if we were talking here about even 2 or 3 years ago, I'd say Sherrod would be very tough to beat. But I'd say now, in this era of realignment where Mahoning Valley writ large went for Trump, and if Mandel can tap into that.
Well, a long way to go. We'll see. The defeat of Hillary Clinton and the election of Donald Trump and the policies of the new Trump administration have fired up Democrats, especially those on the far left. They are protesting at the State House. They are outside Republican lawmakers' offices. They are making phone calls, sending emails. It's very similar to the reaction of the far right after the election of President Obama and passage of the Affordable Care Act. Sandy Tice, are we seeing a Tea Party on the left emerging here?
We are seeing a bigger, better organized Tea Party on the left. One of the reasons why Hillary didn't do better is because a lot of the rank and file people didn't like her. They didn't like having somebody who was for the TPP for a long time until her opponent showed her the religion. They didn't like having somebody who used to be on the Walmart board. And the rank and file Democrats are taking back their party from the party leaders. There are over 120 new groups in Ohio. A lot of them have reached out to Progress Ohio. We now have a statewide progressive action calendar that is getting hundreds of hits a day from people looking for a rally to go to, seeing where they can participate. I think it's going to last, because I think we're starting to see people move from the agitation phase to finding out things that they can work on in terms of policy and candidates. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm really hopeful.
If that continues, then it will simply drive the white working class directly into the arms of the Republican Party. Once again, this is a realignment time, and I think the odds of that happening are actually quite high. If you have classic wine-drinking Democrats, beer-drinking Democrats. The beer-drinking Democrats, the Reagan Democrats, they went for Trump this cycle.
But they said that about the Tea Party in its early days, that the Tea Party is going to alienate the more moderate Republican and send them to the Democrats. But that didn't really happen. At least it didn't
happen.
Bore itself out in the election.
It did not happen in this cycle. Well, it hasn't happened here in Ohio because, remember, Ed Fitzgerald was next to, Rob Birch, the worst candidate the D's have put up in forever. And Hillary Clinton, if the DNC had been a fully functioning body, I maintain she would not have been their candidate. They would have had somebody else who would have been competent, who would have had a better history, who could actually have run a campaign. And remember where Michigan was.
I think there's already buyer's remorse with Donald Trump. We're seeing that in southeastern Ohio with people who benefit from the Affordable Care Act. didn't always know that Obamacare was the same as the Affordable Care Act. And Donald Trump has set a record for having his unfavorability rating higher than his favorability rating since polls started take.
Joe, are Democrats organized enough to be the party of no? The Republicans were very rigid and organized and disciplined. They were the party of no on everything. Are Democrats, do they have that same
Well, let's look
discipline?
at, I remember Senate Bill 5. And Democrats were very organized on Senate Bill 5. They hated it, and they were able to get massive amounts of people downtown protesting. They were able to repeal it at the ballot box, and 4 years later, the Republicans came back and they got John Kasich reelected. Well, there's a reason because people have a very short memory, and voters can become very confused around election time if they don't have that lasting power of going into it. If everyone's all upset now, and then they kind of get over it in the fall, and then we wait till the next election and they hear messages pro or con, that formulates different than if they're upset now and they stay upset. So the question is, do they stay upset?
There's some worry, Jim, that the party of no could backfire. But Republicans have been the party of no, and they hold the both branches of the House and the Senate on Capitol Hill, the presidency, all the state, many of the state houses across the country.
Well, a lot of it is, what are you saying no to? If you're saying and how are you framing that message? If you're saying no, if the Democrats are able to frame it as we're saying no to plans to get rid of a healthcare system that's going to leave millions of people without coverage who currently have it. We're saying no to an immigration policy that does more harm than good, and down trade policies that alienate our allies. I mean, if those if they can frame it the right way, then it could be some benefit. The other question is, to what end? I mean, even if they build momentum heading into 2018, it could help in some of these state levels, the governor's races and others. Congressional, however, I'm going to be very dubious because of gerrymandering. Yeah. Ohio, we would take a tremendous swing of the political wins in Ohio for any of these districts that Republicans currently hold to change over. So there, I think that impact will be lessened because of that.
How about the Democrats facing primary challenges like the Republicans did from the Tea Party? Do we see that happening here?
I think on the statewide level, we're going to see primaries, and we're going to hopefully see the Democratic Party butt out and not anoint any candidates. And that will give the people the voice that they need, that they're looking for, and that will help change the system.
If I wasn't a good Methodist, I'd be willing to put money down on that last statement, because I do not see the Ohio Democratic Party is run by 5 older white men, all labor leaders, and they like picking and choosing, and they're going to try to pick and choose again.
They got a revolt on their hands, a big one.
Yeah.
Could it backfire a little bit? I mean, Betsy DeVos was trying to get into a school on Friday, and protesters blocked her from getting into a school. It was caught on cell phone camera, and it just didn't look good. She went around and got into another entrance, but she is the education secretary now. She won confirmation. It was a fight. It's over. She's trying to do her job, reach out to the public schools. Does that have a bad look for the protesters?
I don't think we should behave that way. I was at the Women's March in Washington with 500,000 of my close friends. There was not one arrest. There was not one disturbance. All these have been peaceful. We're having conversations, and they're starting to turn to how can we take back our party, and I think that's really an important conversation.
There were some groups, the anarchist groups.
That was before the Women's March, the day before.
Yeah, at the inauguration.
Right.
And then also in Oregon or Washington or someplace out west. Anyway, Ohio has the highest number of opioid overdose deaths in the nation. Experts say it's an epidemic, a crisis, but the governor's proposed budget only increases spending for mental health and drug addiction services by 1%. The Kasich administration touts Medicaid expansion as a key tool in helping to fight opioid use and abuse, but Democrats and Republicans at the State House say that's not enough. Jim Siegel, what do the critics want? They want more money, and how do they want it spent?
Well, I don't know that there's a complete consensus yet. But I know that they're working on it. And by they, I mean I know the House Republicans, at least in particular, they have the budget now. There is frustration there and some disappointment among Republicans that the Kasich's budget does not do more to attack what has been widely considered to be the biggest problem right now in Ohio. I mean, 3,000 overdose deaths in a year. We are number 1 in the nation, and that's not per capita. That's just number 1 overall. I think one of the issues is that yes, Medicaid expansion and some of these things have given people health care. what about the treatment? There are not the treatment beds available, and this is a long-term problem. You know, when somebody gets addicted to heroin, this is not something you can just solve by going to the doctor a few times. You have to, you know, it's intensive. I was talking to one fairly prominent Republican who said, we've picked most of the low-hanging fruit now. Now we really need to start getting into some of the more expensive and more in-depth and intense issues in this, and drug treatment is one of them. And I do think the House, I was told by a House Republican, he said, trust us, when this comes out of the House, you are going to know that this is our priority. We don't know it by the budget we see now, but you will know it by the time we're done with it.
Can the state afford it? We hear talk of a possible recession. The schools got a slight increase.
Look, on a cost-benefit analysis, it makes perfect sense for the state to invest a fair amount of its coin into this problem. The thing I want the state to be aware of, though, at all points in time, is that you got a difference between treating the symptoms, which is what we hear a lot of. Basically, you could put a treatment house on every block, you know, and three in every small town. What we're going to have to do is understand why this is coming about. And the recommendation for the listeners out there, watchers out there, is to read 3 books. Dreamland by Sam Quinones, which has spent a lot of time in Portsmouth, Ohio. Hillbilly Elegy, which was based largely in Middletown, Ohio. And Bridges Out of Poverty by Phil Duvall, who, full disclosure, he's asked me to co-author his next book with him. But if you read those 3 books, you will then begin to understand why and how this whole thing is going.
But this is expensive, Joe. Many of the documentaries I've seen and stuff that I've read, it takes sometimes 3, 4, 5 times going through treatment, relapsing, going through treatment, relapsing, before you finally kick the habit, or you're hooked, you're cured from this addiction, and that's going to cost a lot of money.
You're right. You're right. The treatment is expensive. This is an expensive problem, but the real solution, this is a symptom. Jean's right. It's a symptom of a problem. The real problem is you have a lot of people who cannot get jobs. They cannot have the kind of life that they need to have to survive and be happy, and that's where all this comes in. So, you know, there's more to it than just funding the drug problem. The drug problem doesn't exist on its own. You've got to fund a lot of other things, education. You've got to work for job recovery and economic development. It's a multifaceted solution, and I think that's where they're running into problems. The lawmakers do realize that, I think, but they just don't know how to get there.
And part of the problem is that you cannot do this via silos. You have to do this as part of an integrated, unified approach, and that is very difficult to get the agencies, state and local agencies, to begin to cooperate on this.
Sandy, Governor Kasich, in his budget message, pointed to Marysville as a community that's rallied around and is having some success. I haven't looked into it that closely, but he says they're having some success in fighting this. How much of this should be borne by the local governments? Local communities?
One of the reasons is because Marysville is the home of Honda, and there's 12,000 good-paying, family-sustaining jobs there. I don't hear anybody clamoring, other than the Republican elite, for another income tax cut for the very truly wealthy. Maybe we should take that money and we should invest that in the treatment and in education and in the things that will actually help address these systemic problems that we have.
I mean, Kasich's, you know, his Medicaid, mental health directors all testified this week, and some of them they made some decent points about the difficulties in this. You know, you just can't say, I'm going to open up another treatment center. You've got to actually have people qualified to run it. You've got to find a place to put it. There's a lot of we don't want those people here in our community, so it's hard to find places where you can put a treatment center. So there are barriers beyond just funding that we have to deal with.
Prison reform, because when we release somebody from prison for a drug offense, the key thing is getting them separated from their old cronies for the next 72 hours. If they reconnect within that 72-hour block with their old friends, their old cohorts, they'll be right back into doing drugs. So it's a whole lot of different way of approaching this. So once again, multi-agency.
One suggestion, Joe, was from the State's Joint Commission on Drug Use, was to have it in the schools at every grade, not just DARE in 3rd or 5th grade, but every grade have substance abuse education for students. Is that feasible? Will it work?
Well, I think there's a push to do that, and I mean, I don't know. We don't know if that will work or not. It's something that you might want to try, but on the other hand, we've been saying no to our kids since Nancy Reagan.
Yeah.
And I mean, most of the parents of people who are addicted to opioids would tell you that they've sat down and had conversations with their children when they were little about the dangers of drugs. I guess the question is it because they didn't know that drugs were bad that people get hooked on opioids, or is the problem more complicated than that? Yeah. And I'm going to guess it's the latter.
Yeah, I think it's definitely more complicated, and you know, if I'm school districts, I got to be like, really? You want us to do more to solve another societal ill? I mean, and at the same time, over 350 of us are getting cut in the state budget. You know, they
seems like a good possible solution, but yeah, you pile on everything else they have, and it's tough. Just weeks after Ohio lawmakers approved a law banning abortions after 20 weeks, abortion opponents want tougher restrictions. Ohio Right to Life wants lawmakers to ban an abortion method used during the second trimester. The method removes fetal tissue with surgical instruments and suction. Abortion foes call the practice inhumane. Abortion rights supporters say the move would essentially ban abortion after 13 weeks because most second trimester abortions are performed using that method. Joe Ingles, the 20-week ban hasn't even gone into effect yet. It's likely going to be blocked in the courts because other states have blocked this ban. Why is the Ohio Right to Life pushing for more?
Well, they're always pushing for more. I mean, that's why. Because Ohio Right to Life, that is their goal is to eliminate abortion. But the most recent attempt, it would get rid of dilation and extraction, which is a procedure that is used in abortion, but it's also the same procedure that's often used in a miscarriage situation. So if you have people out there talking about it in one way, you're going to have other people who are women who are going to say, wait a minute, I had, you know, a miscarriage and that was the procedure. There's already a level of knowledge with this one.
This bill only applies to abortions.
It only applies to abortions. It does.
This proposal, anyway. Mm-hmm. Sandy, you're with NARAL, you're a very strong advocate for abortion rights.
Let's not look at it in terms of anti-abortion, pro-choice. Let's look at it from the point of view of the medical community. The American Medical Association, the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the Family Medical Associations all agree that abortion is a medically necessary, sometimes safe, most of the time, and it should be available to women under a multitude of circumstances pre-viability. If Right to Life wants to keep calling themselves pro-life, what are they doing about our infant mortality rate that is so high? It's shameful in a state like Ohio. Let's focus our attention on keeping the babies we have alive to their first birthday.
Gene, what are the chances of this, and what do you think happens with this?
I think the bill has an excellent chance in some form of passing, and I think the reason that has not gotten a whole lot of press and a whole lot of coverage is why I call this the Kermit Gosling response. Kermit Gosling was a abortionist in Philadelphia who recently got convicted of a variety of crimes associated with this, and it's because the medical community and the pro-choice community failed to police one of their own. And I think what you're seeing now is the pendulum has swung, and there's now a strong effort to try to go ahead and set up some boundaries here. Because before there were no boundaries, and he crossed every single one of them.
That's one incident, though. I mean, it's like calling for gun control when a guy shoots 26-year-olds in a school in Connecticut.
Because out of that incident there, and what we saw there, the thing is that we are thinking we need to, if everybody's obeying this, then this won't have, if everybody's doing good practices, this will have minimum impact. But I think this will have a huge impact on the Ryan Goslings of the world, or Kermit Goslings of the world. Ryan Gosling's an actor.
Yes. Jim, Governor Kasich, it seemed like he signed the 20-week, vetoed the heartbeat bill. Right. Where does he go with 13 weeks?
He'd probably sign it. I don't know why. I mean, it would depend. I guess it would depend on whether or not the courts have already been weighing in and shutting down other states that have tried this. I mean, you know, John Kasich is, you know, he's anti-abortion and is, you know, more than willing to sign these types of bills. His big problem with the heartbeat bill was that he figured it would be shot down and unconstitutional. Yeah. And so, you know, I think you started off asking why do they continue doing this? Well, one of the reasons is there's been no political consequence to not doing it. Yeah. You know, the more they push for more and more restrictions on abortion, the more seems the Republicans keep winning more elections, at least in Ohio.
Yep.
So until there is any, until these marches turn into some kind of organized backlash and they start losing at the polls, these types of bills are going to continue to pass.
Okay, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. Gene Krebs, you're up first. Sandy Tice, you're up first. Sorry, Gene. Ladies first.
If you are as demoralized as I am by the Trump presidency, I hope you found some hope this week when a 3-judge panel, unanimous, bipartisan, came out and checked the abuses of the Trump administration by saying that the hold on his proposed Muslim ban could stick around. One of the things that differentiates our democracy from other forms of government is our chief executive doesn't have absolute power, and the courts, where the judges are appointed for life, provide that check and balance.
Gene.
After the state budget, the most important bill right now before the General Assembly is the Data Ohio bill. Lead co-sponsor is young Mr. Duffy, here Central Ohio of Worthington. Without it, local governments, without this bill passing, local governments will not be able to borrow money or issue debt.
Okay. Jim.
Look for wholesale changes in the state, in Governor Kasich's state budget. Look for changes in the tax plan. Look for changes in education funding, drug treatment options, and a whole host of other things. The House Republicans especially are really looking to make some changes here.
Okay, and Joe?
I think a lot of the politicians right now are looking to chip away in pieces at things rather than having big wholesale bills. And I think that's where people, if you really want to know what's going on in government, look at what's being chipped away, the boring stories.
Okay. The boring stories. Governor Kasich told a sports radio talk show host this week that he thinks the Monday after the Super Bowl should be a national holiday. As a blissful Patriots fan who struggled through Monday, I wholeheartedly agree. That's Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online, Facebook, Twitter, and our website, WOSU.org. For our crew and panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.